Amid the searing sands of ancient Mesopotamia, one of Rome's wealthiest and most influential figures met an end, so appalling it reverberated through the empire for generations. Marcus Licinius Crassus, renowned as the richest man in Rome, had amassed his fortune through exploitation and war profiteering, only to discover that unchecked avarice can become its own executioner. This is the chilling account of how gold, the very symbol of his dominance, became the weapon of his gruesome undoing. The year was 53 BCE, and Rome's appetite for expansion had reached a boiling point. Power in the Republic lay in the hands of three men bound by a fragile alliance: Pompey the Great, Julius Caesar, and Marcus Crassus. While Pompey and Caesar cemented their fame through martial triumphs, Crassus faced a bitter truth. He was perceived as little more than a financier in a world of generals. Though his wealth built on property speculation and human suffering bought influence, it failed to earn him the admiration he so desperately sought. As he watched Caesar triumph in Gaul and Pompey rule the seas, Crassus saw his own legacy reduced to ledgers and coin. The humiliation of being regarded as the lesser of the triumvirate gnawed at his pride. At an age when others might retire to luxury, the 60-year-old saw only one path to lasting renown: military conquest to rival his exalted peers. The Parthian Empire gleamed before him like a treasure ripe for the taking. Spanning from the Euphrates to the Indus, it commanded the lucrative trade routes of silk and spices that bridged east and west. Crassus was convinced that victory over Parthia would deliver not only martial acclaim but also unimaginable riches, so vast that even his current wealth would pale in comparison. The Roman Senate, wary of his ambitions, withheld the customary sanction for war. Undeterred, Crassus pressed ahead. By 55 BCE, he had taken up the governorship of Syria and set to work on his invasion plans. He dismissed the cautions of seasoned local commanders familiar with Parthian warfare, branding their advice as cowardice. After all, desert kingdoms had often crumbled before Roman discipline. Why should Parthia be any different? Spurred on by reports of instability within the Parthian leadership, Crassus believed he could strike a decisive blow. He marshaled a formidable 47 legions, totaling close to 40,000 troops, supported by thousands of cavalry and light infantry. It would be one of the largest eastern campaigns Rome had ever undertaken. Among his commanders was his cherished son, Publius, a battle-tested leader who had distinguished himself in Caesar's campaigns. The presence of his heir gave Crassus personal stakes in the war's success. This was to be more than a conquest. It was the foundation of a legacy his family would inherit. The campaign commenced in the spring of 53 BCE as Roman legions advanced across the Euphrates at Zeugma. At first, the operation appeared to justify Crassus's boldness. Local towns either capitulated without a fight or succumbed quickly to Roman siege engines. The open, flat landscape of Mesopotamia seemed perfectly suited to Rome's heavy infantry, and early intelligence indicated that Parthian king Herod II was preoccupied with domestic unrest, leaving the border poorly defended. Yet what appeared as early victories was, in truth, the beginning of a Parthian trap. General Carrhae, a brilliant and youthful commander, was executing a calculated plan, luring Crassus's forces deep into the unforgiving desert, far from their logistical lifelines and into territory that favored agile cavalry over rigid Roman legions. Minor engagements were staged withdrawals, designed to boost Roman overconfidence while depleting their strength through grueling marches, in searing heat. As the Roman army ventured further into the desert, the enemy's real nature began to emerge. Contrary to Roman portrayals of barbarism, the Parthians revealed themselves as a sophisticated force, well-versed in desert warfare. Their strategy centered on maneuverability and ranged attacks. Heavily armored cavalry cataphracts delivered crushing charges, while nimble horse archers fired with deadly precision from distances far beyond Roman retaliation. Chaerena's tactics exposed the shortcomings of Rome's battle doctrine. While the legions excelled in formation-based combat and engineering feats, the Parthians thrived on speed and unpredictability. Where Rome anticipated structured showdowns, the Parthians delivered harassment and attrition. Most notably, Roman generals assumed that a climactic engagement was inevitable, but the Parthians were content to avoid full confrontation, instead bleeding the Roman army through endless skirmishes. The psychological toll was no less calculated. Parthian scouts would appear like phantoms on the horizon, always visible, never reachable, keeping Roman nerves taut. Supply lines were harassed by unseen foes who struck from nowhere and vanished into the dunes. Night brought no respite. Watchmen reported eerie movements and noises, sapping morale and leaving the troops sleepless and on edge. Crassus soon realized that conventional Roman methods were failing in this hostile environment. His famed infantry, unstoppable in the forests of Gaul or the fields of Greece, now struggled against the harsh terrain and elusive adversaries. His cavalry, assembled in haste, lacked the numbers and training to counter the fluid mobility of the Parthian horsemen. Worse still, his supply routes became increasingly exposed to devastating raids. The decisive point arrived at Carrhae, a small northern settlement, where Crassus resolved to confront the enemy. The topography seemed advantageous. Natural elevations offered strongholds for his troops, and a nearby spring promised a temporary end to their water woes. Intelligence indicated Chaerena's main army was advancing, setting the stage for the pitched battle Crassus had long hoped for Rome, that would, in his mind, redeem the campaign and affirm Roman dominance once and for all. At sunrise on the 9th of June, 53 BCE, the Battle of Carrhae commenced with the Roman legions deployed in familiar fashion. Heavy infantry anchored the center, cavalry units held the flanks, and light troops formed a protective screen. Crassus positioned himself among the central ranks, while his son Publius commanded the cavalry on the right. In the golden morning light, their formation gleamed with discipline and grandeur, a proud symbol of Rome's military prowess. But what unfolded next showcased the brilliance of Parthian strategy. Instead of facing a conventional force, the Romans were confronted by a wholly mounted army that maneuvered with uncanny fluidity across the arid landscape. At the center stood the imposing cataphracts, Parthian heavy cavalry sheathed entirely in shimmering scale. Armor-while waves of horse archers surrounded them, moving like a living current, constantly shifting the battlefield dynamics beyond Roman control. The engagement opened with a relentless storm of arrows from the Parthian archers, blotting out the sky. Unlike previous adversaries, whose ammunition quickly depleted, Chaerena had arranged a continuous supply of fresh arrows through mobile logistics teams. Roman scouts designed to block blades and spears were insufficient against the unending barrage. The constant hail of missiles steadily eroded the legionaries' morale and combat effectiveness. In a bold but disastrous move, the youthful Publius Crassus led a cavalry charge against the Parthian center. This maneuver played perfectly into Chaerena's hands. The cataphracts absorbed the impact, while agile horse archers enveloped the flanking cavalry, surrounded and isolated from the main force. Publius and his men were systematically cut down before the eyes of their helpless comrades. The death of Publius marked a devastating psychological shift in the battle. His severed head, mounted on a spear and paraded before the Romans, broke Crassus's will. The seasoned statesman, once brimming with ambition and resolve, now stood paralyzed as confidence crumbled under the weight of grief and failure. Roman cohesion soon unraveled. Encircled by an elusive enemy, tormented by constant attacks, and suffering from thirst and fatigue, the legions realized they had been lured into a death trap. Casualties mounted. Medical support was overwhelmed, and every breakout attempt only deepened their losses. The expansive desert, once envisioned as a path to victory, had become an inescapable tomb. That evening, Crassus tried to lead a retreat toward the town of Carrhae, hoping that the city's structure would shield them from cavalry harassment. But the withdrawal disintegrated into chaos. Weary and demoralized, Roman soldiers discarded their gear and discipline in a desperate dash for survival. In a last-ditch effort to escape, thousands of Roman troops were cut down during the frenzied nighttime retreat, while many others collapsed from heat exhaustion and sheer fatigue, abandoned by fellow soldiers too desperate to help. By dawn, the shattered remnants of Rome's once mighty eastern expedition limped into Carrhae, reduced to less than half their original strength. After a single day's engagement, the once proud legions that had boldly crossed the Euphrates now resembled a broken and demoralized horde battle flags, lost, morale shattered, and their general overwhelmed by grief and the enormity of his collapse. Crassus had gotten the decisive confrontation he had sought, but the result was the exact opposite of his ambitions. Rather than storming the city, Shureena chose to highlight Parthian clemency by proposing a diplomatic solution. He dispatched envoys under a banner of truce, requesting a face-to-face meeting to negotiate the withdrawal of Roman forces. The gesture seemed sincere. Both armies had sustained losses, and the Parthians had made their military superiority clear. For Crassus, who was desperate to salvage even a fragment of dignity or preserve the lives of his surviving troops, the offer represented a fragile glimmer of hope. Arrangements were made for a meeting on neutral ground, with both sides to be accompanied by only a small escort of officers. Despite urgent warnings from his advisors who feared deception, Crassus agreed to the talks. His desperation to escape the nightmare clouded his judgment. He wanted to believe that some honorable compromise was possible, that all had not been lost in this ruinous gamble. What followed remains contentious among ancient chroniclers, but the outcome was undisputed. Violence broke out during the conference, and Parthian troops quickly subdued the Roman delegation. Whether this was a calculated betrayal or a result of miscommunication and rising suspicion, the effect was the same. Crassus was taken captive by the man who had annihilated his army and killed his son. The wealthiest Roman of his era now stood powerless, entirely at the mercy of foes who viewed him with deep contempt. The manner in which Shureena treated his prisoner reflected the intensity of Parthian hostility toward Rome's imperialist designs. Crassus was not seen as a typical captive to be ransomed or swiftly dispatched. He symbolized the arrogance and greed of Roman aggression. His campaign had been an unprovoked incursion driven solely by personal ambition and the lust for wealth, launched with no regard for Parthian sovereignty or the lives that would be sacrificed. His execution was to be a statement both of justice and of symbolism. In a culture that honored integrity over riches and valued deeds above possessions, Crassus represented the worst of Rome's moral decay. His death had to convey a powerful warning, not just to Rome, but to any who might underestimate the Parthian resolve or mistake their empire for easy prey. The execution method selected was both chillingly efficient and symbolically rich. Molten gold, the very element that had shaped Crassus's existence and driven his catastrophic ambition, was to serve as his executioner. Parthian artisans melted gold until it liquefied, producing a molten substance capable of incinerating human flesh while delivering a powerful symbolic blow. The man who had idolized wealth above all else would now confront its most devastating form, captivating, yet fatal, treasured, yet ruinous. His death unfolded before an assembly of Parthian elites and captured Roman troops, transforming it into both a sentence and a public message. Crassus was forced to his knees as Parthian guards pried open his mouth, silencing any final declarations or pleas. The molten gold was administered slowly, drawing out the suffering and ensuring the grim event would be seared into collective memory for generations across the ancient world. The physical torment was beyond comprehension. Liquid metal at nearly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit scorched his mouth, throat, and internal organs while Crassus remained agonizingly aware. But it was the symbolic weight of the act that carried just as much significance. The man who placed wealth above human life, whose fortune was rooted in cruelty and exploitation, was now consumed by the very material he had idolized. His obsession had become his doom. Eyewitnesses recalled his final seconds as a hideous satire of the ideals he had pursued. The mouth that once spoke of glory and conquest was now stuffed with the gold he had chased across empires. The throat that had roared about Roman supremacy was burned away. The body that had basked in unimaginable riches was now a grotesque warning against the perils of unchecked ambition and avarice. The repercussions of Crassus' demise echoed far beyond the battlefield. Word of his execution traveled swiftly to Rome, where it sparked terror among the governing elite. They suddenly recognized that their eastern border was vulnerable, and that Parthia possessed not only the strength, but the resolve to deal devastating blows to Roman might. The myth of Roman invulnerability, nurtured over centuries of conquest, had been annihilated in the sands of Mesopotamia. Political turmoil followed immediately. The power-sharing alliance known as the Triumvirate unraveled, leaving Caesar and Pompey as bitter rivals instead of allies. Deprived of Crassus's wealth and political leverage to stabilize their ambitions, the two remaining leaders began their slow march toward civil war and the ultimate collapse of the Roman Republic. Ironically, in seeking to prevent conflict by dominating the East, Crassus had ignited the very strife he hoped to avoid. The Parthians' handling of other Roman captives further revealed their strategic foresight. Crassus's brutal execution was not wanton cruelty, but a calculated deterrent. Surviving Roman soldiers were relocated to remote areas within the Parthian realm, where they integrated into local communities. These former warriors became living proof of Parthia's mercy toward those who hadn't chosen violence, a stark contrast to the fate of their leader, whose greed and aggression had brought about ruin. The symbolic impact of Crassus' demise echoed across the ancient world, leaving a lasting impression on generations of artists, scholars, and philosophers. The haunting image of molten gold being poured into the mouth of Rome's wealthiest citizen became an enduring allegory for the perils of unrestrained materialism and unchecked ambition. Writing over 100 years later, Plutarch invoked the episode as a cautionary tale on the corrosive power of wealth and the inevitable downfall born of arrogance. Today, historians still debate the literal truth of the molten gold execution, whether it occurred exactly as described or served as a symbolic embellishment. Regardless, its significance is undeniable. Crassus's death marked a pivotal shift in Rome's eastern expansion and illustrated that its adversaries possessed a refined understanding of psychological warfare, not just battlefield tactics. Whether factual or dramatized, the method of his execution encapsulated the broader themes of the conflict. Even the fate of Crassus' remains was absorbed into Parthian propaganda. His severed head was reportedly delivered to the court of King Euphrates II and used as a macabre prop in satirical performances mocking Roman vanity. According to some sources, Parthian actors incorporated the head into stagings of the Bacchae by Euripides, portraying Crassus as a tragic figure undone by his own overreaching ambition. These theatrical displays converted Rome's military humiliation into a source of amusement and cultural reinforcement for the Parthians. Ongoing archaeological excavations at Carrhae continue to uncover evidence of the disaster's magnitude. Scattered weapons, shattered armor, and human remains illustrate a comprehensive defeat of a once mighty force by enemies who excelled in both tactical execution and psychological strategy. In response, Roman military doctrine was revised to reflect hard-learned lessons, though the blow to the empire's reputation was irreversible. The ripple effects of Crassus's death shaped Roman diplomacy and military policy for generations. Future emperors approached the East with greater caution, recognizing that their foes were not crude tribes to be overwhelmed, but cultured powers with sophisticated strategic systems. This realization ushered in a more balanced phase of Roman expansion that valued negotiation alongside force. Crassus's downfall remains a timeless parable about the perils of ambition, untempered by wisdom. His fall from a prosperous financier to a military catastrophe underscores how personal flaws can reverberate beyond the individual, reshaping the destiny of entire civilizations. The molten gold that claimed his life endures as a potent metaphor, reminding us that our deepest desires, when left unchecked, may become our undoing. In a world still defined by the dynamics of wealth and political power, Crassus's fate offers sobering insights into the weight of leadership. His story challenges us to see beyond the lure of riches and conquest and to value foresight, compassion, and accountability. The gilded silence that fell upon Rome's richest man continues to echo through history, warning of the cost of greed and the wisdom in recognizing when we already have enough.